Pot in My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pot in My Noggin. This episode is going to be perhaps a controversial one. It's definitely a controversial topic, and one I wanted to have. Now, to discuss this topic with me, I have Mr. Jack Kammer.
Kammer, yes, like hammer.
Kammer like Kammer, perfect. From Male Friendly Media. So today we're going to actually talk about something that absolutely needs to be talked about for sure. And I'm going to warn all the feminists out there, you're probably going to react just like I did when I read through Jack's website, because I am a feminist. But what's interesting is the topic that we have to talk about is really important. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you, CK. I should maybe allay some of the fears of yourself and the feminists in the audience by mentioning that I am not an anti-feminist. I am a counter-feminist,
Okay.
which is to say that when I hear what feminism has to say, I don't say, no, that's a bunch of baloney.
Mm-hmm.
What I say is yes, and. Feminism does not know everything there is to know about gender issues any more than men knew everything there was to know about gender issues before Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963 and kicked off this current stage of the women's movement. So it's not no, it's yes and.
Yes.
There is a male perspective that needs to be respected, understood, heard, and it really is, from my point of view, quite shocking that in this era of supposed openness and transparency and partnership and engaging our stakeholders and really trying to make everyone feel included and belong, like they belong, it's really shocking how totally men's perspective has been very much marginalized.
Okay. Yeah. I will listen for sure. And I think what's interesting too is that, I want people to understand what drew me to you as a guest on this show. Okay. And so I want to read them something that drew me in immediately. And so you wrote, it began with hearing as a little boy that I was not sugar or spice or anything nice. I had no words to help me understand or express how that made me feel, but I knew it made me feel bad. It sensitized me to other subtle, and not so subtle, messages about the way in which males were wildly regarded as not as good or valuable or worthy for having their feelings heard and respected as females were. And so, for me, I am a feminist, and that's fine. One of the things that I find is really necessary, we've had conversations on this podcast. The saying goes, not all men, but always a man, that sort of thing, whatever those situations is. One of the things that I've explored and thought a lot about is the fact that from becoming like male babies, all throughout their formative years, they are met with a messaging that says, big boys don't cry, man up, don't talk about your feelings. Even mothers do the exact same thing. It's like the societal subscription that everybody just signs up for, and it's so natural to tell men to not feel or emote. And they get this from their parents and their extended family, and then authoritative figures in the community and school, and so the messaging from their first breath throughout their whole life is to, you are not a man if you emote or if you express feelings or if you talk about reflection or any of those things. And my thing is yes, I do believe that it's not all men, but always a man. I do believe that. However, there is an unfair advantage to men when it comes to working through emotions. They are not taught how to do this. They are not taught healthy coping mechanisms. Like, yeah, we have some women who aren't either because of their nuclear family situation. But this is just a blanketed reality for all men, that they are not taught how to communicate their needs, what they're feeling. So that was what drew me in to you specifically, because it's a conversation I think needs to be happening. But if I'm not wrong, it's been happening since 1983 on your part.
Well, actually, I can trace it back to probably the 50s.
Okay.
Another thing that I remember from childhood, along with hearing that I wasn't sugar or spice or anything nice, was sort of the mirror image. It's not mirror in the sense that it's parallel. I think of it more as perpendicular. But let me mention something that you are probably familiar with, and then I'll relate that thing that you are familiar with what happened to me, and I think to probably lots of other young men and boys that we're not familiar with. The feminists in your audience will be happy to hear me acknowledge that if you see a little girl who's good at sports, you don't want to go up to her and say, gee, Susie, you're really good at sports, ... for a girl. Or if she's good at math, or if she's good at science, you don't want to say to her, gee, you're really good at math for a girl, or you're good at science for a girl. We know that. We understand that. We understand how saying such a thing reflects stereotypes. And the purpose of stereotypes largely is to marginalize one group and to privilege another. Gee, Susie, too bad you're a girl, because girls don't really belong in science. We let men do that. Mm-hmm. What I used to hear as a little boy was, gee, Jack, you're really good with babies for a boy.
Okay. Yeah.
In what way was I marginalized? In what way was every other man who heard such a thing marginalized? This does not belong to you. This is not your realm. Mm-hmm. Just as we wanted to keep the realm of careers and academia and science and business to men and used anti-female stereotypes to justify that, we use anti-male stereotypes to justify keeping the other domain that we don't really talk about, primarily the domain of women. And the way I see it is that the male power structure is very obvious. It rises way up high into the sky, and you can see it from 30 miles away. There's no denying it. There is no such obvious from a distance female power structure. It actually requires a bit more sophistication and a bit of aviation capability to see the female power structure, because you won't see the female power structure from 30 miles away because it's only 2 or 3 stories tall. To me, it's not like a skyscraper like the male power structure. To me, the female power structure is much more like a convention center. Only 2, maybe 3 stories high, but it covers 14 acres. Think about what goes on in the male power structure. A lot of competition, a lot of, questionable ethics sometimes from people who are under a lot of pressure to close a sale or make a deal or get the production done and not worrying about dumping toxins into the nearby stream. Just some very strong pressures on the people occupying the male power structure to do things that might not make them feel so good. What goes on in the female power structure? It's about making deals, being friends, networking, forming alliances, finding common ground, working together on common goals, much less about competition. To me, the male power structure has a big dollar sign at the top. The female power structure doesn't have a dollar sign at the top. It doesn't have a top. It just has like the roof of the second floor. What it has is a center. It has an atrium that everything moves around. And in the center of the female power structure, it's not a dollar sign, it's a big red heart. And just as the dollar sign is a good thing if you can get access to it, because we all need to make money, we also all need to have love and relationships. And that's what the big red heart symbolizes. Now, about the male power structure again. We always talk, feminists frequently talk, about the Fortune 500. We look at the top of the male power structure. Look at all those men up there who are running all the Fortune 500 companies. It's just not fair. Well, you might have noticed, I certainly have noticed, that along with the discussion of the Fortune 500 and all the men in it and running it, we have very little discussion of the misfortune 5 million who are at the other side, the other end, the bottom of that pyramid. There is not a lot of common interest between the men at the top and the men at the bottom. It's very different in the female power structure, because me getting a piece of the big red heart is not dependent upon you not getting the piece of the big red heart. It's not a limited thing. You know, in business, in the corporate hierarchies, you know, there's only a few deals, not a few, there's a limited number of deals to be made. The economy goes up and it goes down. It has booms and it has busts. And when the busts occur, the pressure is really on men. In the female power structure, a woman gets access to the big red heart just by virtue of being a woman. The Europeans have a saying that a woman is what she is, a man is what he does. For a man to get a piece of that big dollar sign, he's got to do. He's got to perform. For a woman to have access to relationships and love and affection and caring and compassion and to have her emotions cared for and respected, she's just got to be a woman. She gets that automatically. A man who says, hey, I'd like some of that, is discouraged from speaking up in that way by all of the things you mentioned. However, it has to happen. It has to proceed in that direction. Men need equal access to the convention center, to the big red heart, every bit as much as women have needed access to the male power structure and the dollar sign.
Okay,
that's it.
I'm processing.
Okay.
I like how you circled back there and closed that loop. Because for a second there, I was thinking, I'm like, okay, so this is the male power structure, but I would argue that there's a lot of women out there who want to be a part of that structure. So
yes, definitely.
Sure. It's interesting that I see where you're going with this now. So really, when you're talking about male equality on malefriendlymedia.com, it is reciprocity that you're talking about. So you're saying that one of the problems in these two structures is that women don't have access to this male power structure, and men don't quite have the same access to the female power structure. And that's due to the fact, and I'm unpacking now because you're making my wheels turn. So that's due to the fact that I read a couple things on your website. So, malefriendlymedia.com for anybody who wants to go take a look. It's interesting how one thing stood out to me. For women to take over a large part of the male power structure, as you would say, with the dollar sign, men would need to, in equal parts, have access to the female power structure, and especially surrounding parenthood, right? So fathers
Yes.
being parents and being maybe stay-at-home dads, or sharing the wealth of parenting and household governance. Do you think we've seen growth there, though, in time? But we still have ways to go, yes. But
Well, I would say that since 1963 and Betty Friedan's publication of her book, The Feminine Mystique, and her subsequent launch of the National Organization for Women. And by the way, in her book, she recognized that men too had deficits because of the gender system we were in. I would say that since 1963, there has been a whole lot more progress in giving women equal access to the formerly male domain than the other way around. Now, yes, progress has been made and progress is being made in the direction of men getting full and equal access to the female power structure. However, there is also a very large backlash against that.
yeah, and I'm not a massive podcast, but if when we do snippets of this, I do have a feeling that I'm probably going to get some pretty nasty comments. But the thing to me is I see stuff online in social media where these women are like, if my man ever cried, I'd kick him to the curb, right? And there's that kind of dialogue, right? And and people are almost in support of that. There's like an echo chamber where that sort of kind of gets reinforced from other people. But then if a man says something that's sort of derogatory or brings the woman's work value down to practically nothing if they were to do something, then it's massive backlash. And I'm not arguing, just for anyone who's listening, that men don't have to do better when it comes to how they treat women, but I do believe that women have to do better in how they treat men as well. Because the thing is if a man is with you and he cries, okay, you need to shut the fuck up and listen. Because if he is showing you emotion like that, that's going against every grain of who he has been programmed to be in his entire life. Lose your attitude and listen. Ask him what he needs. And it's not about, this is, for me, it's less about sexism, and I like your points, but it's less about the sexism for me. It's more about simple humanity. If you have a girlfriend who comes to your house and breaks down and cries, your initial reaction is to smother with love and affection and support and all of those things. But if a man were to do those same things, you may not think of those things, or you may do them, but subconsciously reduce his value as a man because he's now blubbering, if you will, or having an emotional reaction. I think it's such a. Anytime I see someone, a male, talk about their feelings out loud, is one of the most powerful and most beautiful things that I could see. And I want to see more of it. And I think for women specifically, I get feminism and I get, because I am, but I get also that, men are the perpetrators in a lot of things. However, not all men. So why can't we show them kindness? Why can't we break that feedback loop, if you will, that
CK, could I also say that there are many opportunities and many opportunities taken for and by women to do bad things to men.
oh, of course. Of course.
Well, we need to say that, and we
Oh,
need to put that on the table.
I will say that. So
So we need to say not all women, but in the ways that are the most hurtful to men, it is very, very, very often a woman who is wreaking the havoc.
well, I guess, I mean, if there's going to be people who are getting inflamed by this, and that's fine, because it's a conversation that needs to be had. When you're looking at the dynamic, of course, it's always going to be man and or woman, right? If we're talking about sexism and feminism, this is where we land here, right? It's going to be a man or a woman, and I agree with you. There are women who instigate. There are women who do shit towards men all the time. They feel justified, of course. I don't know if they're justified. I'm not. So I'm a feminist in the fact, and I want to be clear about this to anyone who's listening. I'm a feminist in the fact that a woman should have the equal rights to do anything a man can do, and can. Straight up, end of story. Zero pay gap, zero anything. I think the future should be female, because let's give that a shot and see how we fare. I think we would do pretty well. However, I do not agree with feminism where you attack men, and it's such a weird conversation to have and a place to be, because there's such a polarization across it, right? All we hear about are women being raped and assaulted and harassed and all of these particular things. And it does happen. I mean, there's statistics and studies and all of that sort of thing. Obviously, when women are doing things towards men, it's not criminal, if you will, more psychological.
There are actually some crimes that occur but are not prosecuted.
Fair.
Because of certain biases that work in women's favor.
Yeah, I don't like, that's something I'm going to be honest with. I don't like it when any woman uses the fact that they're a woman to perpetuate a bias in a situation. I also don't like it when a man does it, just so we're clear here. When I talk equality, I literally talk equality for everybody. Man, woman, race, creed, you name it. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I'm really interested to see how people will react to this conversation. So what we're saying here, we're going to take a quick break in just a second, but what we're saying, to recap the first half of this conversation, is that male power structure is high in the sky with a dollar sign. There's some ethical issues, but there's a lot of competition, and it's high pressure, right? Now, we're going to have women out there who say they are a part of that as well, and that's completely fine. And then you wanted to determine and distinguish, that the people at the top, the makers and the breakers at the top, are very far removed from the people who support the Fortune 5 million. Or
the misfortune
5 million. And then we're looking at a female power structure that's more like a great big gigantic mall or conference center that's like 15 acres, really massive structure that you don't see from 30 miles away, but it's there. And at the center of that is heart, which stands for love and value and all of those particular components, right? And yes. So in order to find true equality, equal access has to be provided to the male-dominated structure, power structure, as there is to the female, and vice versa is how I meant to say that. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about some actual ways that we might consider doing that. We'll be right back, everybody.
Partner today with CK Sims and Pod and My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everybody. We are talking to Jack Kammer, like Hammer, from Male Friendly Media, and we won't recap much of what we just talked about because I'm being cognizant of time. But we're talking about men's mental health, and we're talking about how men's health and men's feelings have become marginalized, right? So I like the idea of having this conversation because we do look at men and we often take for granted that, a man's a man and they don't feel and they're going to tough it up and they're going to get through it and they're going to make it work and they're going to provide and they're going to build the house and the cottage. And we think about all of these really like strenuous sort of things that men are capable of doing, right? But we never actually sit back and be like, oh, I wonder what. We don't even have the empathy, I don't think, programmed in us full circle to look at a man and wonder how much that person may struggle or what's their internal dialogue or what have they gone through in life to get to where they are today. Whereas we have these thoughts and conversations about women, right? When a man acts like an asshole, he's an asshole, right? When a woman acts like an asshole, well, is she an asshole or what's her home life like? Is she being abused? Is she getting enough love and support from her husband at home? Is she doing all the work by herself? All of these things. And this is not to dismiss or discredit or discount anything a woman experiences. But what I would like to understand is why we are automatically programmed to think that way to women and not men. And what are some ways that we as a people can start normalizing and closing the gap on men's personal emotions and feelings?
So, you've talked so far very eloquently, and I'm very grateful and appreciative of what you've been saying. You've been talking about the need for men to have their emotions respected, valued, appreciated, cared about. There's more to it. And what there is not what's in it for the man, because what men as human beings, as good human beings, or striving to be good human beings, want to do is to be connected to something larger than themselves. They don't want it to be all about them.
Okay.
And so, as much as we need to talk about caring about men's emotions, because their emotions are their spark plugs of their personalities. And if you see a man who's just a real stick in the mud, depressed, aimless, maybe it's because he really doesn't pay attention to what his emotions are trying to tell him he ought to be doing for himself. Besides emotions that the man needs to have taken care of, his own emotions that he needs to have taken care of, there is this great ability that men have. It was a big waste back in the late 1800s through the middle of the 20th century, even happening today to some extent. It was a big waste when a woman said, I think I'd like to be a doctor. And everybody in her social circle, her family, her parents, her friends said, what? You want to be a doctor? You can't be a doctor. Big waste. Big waste. Some women didn't listen to that, became doctors. Fine, excellent, wonderful doctors. Same with scientists, same with business people, especially the same with lawyers. A woman who wanted to be a lawyer, oh my God, you don't want to embrace your natural instincts as a woman? You want to argue and fight all day rather than embrace this opportunity you have to love and nurture children all day? There might be something wrong with you. Big waste of that woman's capabilities of being a great lawyer, great politician, a great leader, a huge waste. What we're wasting today on the male side of the equation is men's natural inherent ability to love and nurture others, especially their kids. Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you think it would be an interesting thing and maybe a good thing to turn over the world to women. Let women run the world. We wouldn't have any wars, as often said. Well, okay, I'll go with that experiment. But at the same time, we're running another experiment, and we're letting men raise the kids.
Okay.
And to the extent that it might be true that there will be no more wars when women run international relations, I think it's just as plausible to say there will be much less turmoil among our youth if we have men and male values being directly inculcated into them as they're growing to adulthood. Pretty provocative, I know, but I think there might be even some truth to it.
Okay, so I'm not against this at all, because if women are running the world, we're going to need people at home taking care of the children in the house. However, define what you mean by male values.
Well, suppose I asked you, would you have a problem defining female values?
I'm not a female, but I think it's very different for every single person. But I think that there's some core values that they want to be loved and respected. They want equal opportunity in the workforce and the world, and same pay, and to be able to walk alone at night without having to worry about being attacked. I think that those are core values for a lot of women.
Okay, so those are the things women want.
Okay.
When I talk about male values, I'm not talking about what men value.
Okay.
I'm talking what men value to get for themselves. I'm talking about the values that men wish to inculcate into the culture. There
Okay,
is
so
such a thing. Huh?
What are they? What
Okay.
are they? Give me an example.
Honor,
Okay.
sacrifice,
Okay.
duty,
Okay.
trying to take less than you give. Now, I'm not saying women don't do that, but I'm saying that these values that are very much a part of male culture are a good thing. Now, they can become a bad thing because too much of any good thing is a bad thing. But those are the male values that I'm talking about, our kids really being able to benefit from. Another one that comes to mind right away is the balance between safety, which is generally identified as a female value, and growth, adventure, risk, pushing the boundaries. A male value, I would argue. Now, this is not to say that there aren't women who have a lot of what are called male values, and there are not a lot of men who have what are called female values. But just generally speaking, it's probably not a good idea to talk about these as male values and female values, but rather values of culture A and values of culture one. A and one.
So, like, a thought comes to mind though, like, because you said core values isn't honor, sacrifice. I'm trying to remember the other ones. I have a goldfish brain. I apologize. Honor and sacrifice. There was another
Well,
two.
safety versus risk, safety versus adventure, safety versus expanding the envelope, safety versus risking a lot of money into a business that might not take off at all. But, think of how many businesses were started on a shoestring and worked. Of course, there are also plenty of businesses started by men on a shoestring, and they fail. We don't, really think too much about those fellas. Even though we see them in the statistics of, alcoholism, mental health problems, suicide, addictions, various psychological maladies. So, that's just a quick recap of the male values that I mentioned. And again, we probably shouldn't say male values from culture A.
Culture A or culture one. Do you think that the general man perpetuates those values current day?
I think that what makes men happy is having the opportunity and getting the appreciation that they want for demonstrating those values. Yes, I think that those values are very key to men's happiness.
So basic needs, essentially.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Now, the idea of what is a definition of a real man comes up here. And I'm going to offer you my definition of a real man. And it's really going to muddy the waters, but really not muddy them. Maybe what it does is clarify them. Maybe it just filters out all of the mud that's in the muddy waters. I think the best definition of a real man is a man who does not care at all about anybody else's definition of a real man. Take away all, yeah, I like it too. Take away all that pressure. And it's what is this definition of a real man? Well, if you are a real man, you'll do what the society wants you to do, which is to get out there and be productive. We don't care about your happiness, but you'll be productive.
And you'll be tough.
You'll be tough. You'll be ready to fight our wars if we need you to. You'll be willing to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week if we need you to. You'll do what we want you to do because you know that if you don't do it, we're going to call you a wuss.
Yeah, yeah.
And think back to when you had quote unquote sissy boys in your neighborhood. Sissy boys were one thing, not generally appreciated and lauded. On the other side of the coin, tom girls were kind of cool.
They were, yeah. They were, actually. I was a sissy boy then and today, essentially. Being gay growing up in a small rural town, right? I heard always.
Did you ever wonder why the culture seems, especially when you were growing up, did you ever wonder why the culture had exerted so much pressure on you not to come out, not to be gay, that maybe we can fix you or cure you or whatever needs to be done so that you're not gay anymore? Did you ever wonder why society doesn't want you to be gay?
Well, I come from a religious background. My parents are ministers, so I thought it was because I was going to burn in hell, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's just sort of another way of calling you a wuss. You're going to be a wuss in hell.
Yes. So what would your thought on why society wanted
Well, I cannot think of any reason for men, heterosexual men, to be gay bashers other than to make sure that the eligible women in their milieu don't have any thoughts or questions about the fact that they are heterosexual men, and I'm going to prove it by beating up on this gay guy. Don't think that just because, I rode next to him on the bus that I'm gay. No, and I'll prove it because I'll beat this guy up and make his life miserable. I really can't think of a reason for heterosexual men to discourage other men from not competing with them for eligible women.
That's funny. That's a whole nother podcast, I think. That's interesting, right? Your competition pool is getting less when men come out as homosexual. Never thought about it that way before. I like how you prefaced with heterosexual men, because I think that there's a lot of closeted, purported heterosexual men who also gay bash bucks for different reasons. It's undeniable that the pressures that a male face from birth throughout life on to be something so structured and solid and unemotive and not caring, if you will, right? Caring, yes, but not someone who can show that they care because they would be called a wuss or they would be ridiculed because of it. So, cognizant of time, for people who are listening, who are still listening, because we might have lost some people, and I'm okay with that, because a conversation has to be had. And if you're afraid to have conversations that are going to piss people off, then don't do a podcast. So, for people who are listening though and want to know how, what could a woman, let's focus on the woman first, not because I'm picking on the women, y'all. What could a woman do, something small, something in their lives that could positively impact the male experience? And I don't mean that from like a privileged state of mind. I mean it from a values and mental health state of mind.
A very helpful thing would be to evidence even the tiniest break from the strictures of the sisterhood, which could be accomplished simply by saying to your BFFs when you go for a girls' night out at your favorite bar to eat tacos or sushi or whatever the hell you're going to do, and a couple of the women in the group start ragging about, oh, I shouldn't have said ragging. That's a bad word. Okay. Who start complaining about men with really sweeping generalizations and absolute lack of empathy for the male situation. Just to say, excuse me, ladies, I really need to say something here. I think that, for 60 years, we've been complaining about how men have been sexist and denigrating toward women. Isn't it time we took stock about what we need to stop doing in the same way? Just a very tiny little thing. Now, that's going to be a buzzkill, but it's going to be a buzzkill that's going to plant some new seeds, and we're going to have a more robust and beautiful garden. Another thing, CK, do we have time for me to mention another thing? Okay. See, I'm talking about synergy here. I'm talking about a win-win. If you think about the lawyer, the female lawyer, who is really good, and she's got it in her mind, she's going to make partner in 6 years. What does she know about what that 6 years is going to involve? She knows it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of hours. She also wants to have a family. Before women got into the corporate world, there was no such phrase as work-life balance. It was just, you go to work. Men just went to work, and they came home grumpy, and that was about it. She knows she is going to be at the office a lot. She loves her kids. She wants to make sure her kids are happy and safe and taken care of, and that there's somebody reliable who loves them, raising them. Who better than her husband, the kid's father? There are plenty of men who have had their taste of corporate life, who have had their taste of running around in a pickup truck with paintbrushes and ladders and trying to eke out a living as a handyman or a contractor, and the pressure to make money crushing them, working 70, 80 hours a week, giving up weekends because they got a contract that's going to put some money on the table. Lots of men, and the Pew Research Center recently found that it is men, even more than women these days, who are saying they do not spend enough time with their kids. There are plenty of men who, properly encouraged, just like women had to be properly encouraged to go for it, to be a doctor, to be a lawyer, be a scientist, be an astronaut, be an airline pilot, whatever. Men properly encouraged could maximize their abilities to demonstrate their nurturing capacity, if that's what they feel they've got. And at the same time, the woman can rely on that to pursue her career without always worrying about what's happening with the kids. And what she does in the bargain is he doesn't have to worry about making all the money. He might, many men probably would, want to develop some kind of a side hustle. But, with the internet, there's plenty of ways these days, and there's even podcasts specifically about this, how parents can make money with a side hustle from home. So we're talking synergy here. You got a woman maximizing her talents as a lawyer, which she intuited from her childhood, from her upbringing. I love kids, but I don't think I want to be a full-time mother. I want to be a lawyer. But how am I going to do that? How am I going to have a huge career as a lawyer without driving myself crazy and burning the candle at both ends? I got an idea. I'll find a man who's the perfect complement for that.
It's almost as if you're like pushing to flip the role. Not fully, but you know what I mean? Like for whoever that works for.
Yes. Yes.
Women could be the breadwinner, men could be the nurturers. Now I'm also
Yes.
seeing a lot of things I've heard in life and seen in life with, women talking about the men at home with the kids when they get left and all of that sort of thing. But like one thing is for sure, we're not going to solve this issue in one podcast that's about 50 minutes long. But it is a conversation that needs to be had and to be continue to be had. You have been doing this for like 4 decades, so we need to talk about it more. I think it's interesting the way that that you've presented the almost the flip of what's socially normal, if you will. Female breadwinners, male homemakers, essentially. Male values, female values, that sort of thing. I think it's a very interesting concept. I think we see some of that right now, but I think it also points back to the men's mental health piece and what they place their worth on. So, society will tell a man that they are not a man if they let their wife go out and earn the money. And like they'll get these messages from absolutely everywhere. So, um, it'll be the family's disappointment. It'll be the wife's mother's father's disappointment. It'll be their friends saying like, "Can't believe you let that man stay home all day." Blah 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 blah. I do see the hypocrisy there, right? There is a hypocrisy there, whether people like to hear that or not. There is, because if the woman can go work and be the breadwinner, and the man can stay home and take care of the children and be nurturing, then why is that? Why is he less than because of that? And why is the only alternative that a woman must do both the corporate and the homemaking while the man just has to worry about corporate and come home? Like, why is that a healthy alternative? Because I don't think it is. But many conversations to be had. This is a very interesting conversation. I am interested to see once it's published how people respond to it. And I would love to have more conversations and see more conversations in this sort of arena. I hope that one day we can get to a place where the male perpetuated stereotype, not from a woman's perspective specifically, but just around like what makes a real man a real man. I'd like that to be adopted for what you had to say. Like they don't care. They're just who they are, being themselves. And I want them to find safety in speaking about their feelings and knowing that it's okay not to be okay and that you're no less a man if you're emotive than you are if you're not. You know what I mean? It takes great courage to talk about what bothers you. So the bravery in that speaks to more of being a man to me, I think. But we all have our preconceived notions. Anyway, Jack, great conversation. Thank you very much for being here. You can, if you're interested in reading more and following Jack, you can go to malefriendlymedia.com. He has great resources on there. He has written books as well. I had the names up at some point, but you can find all of that information on his website. Thank you very much for being here, Jack. I appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate it, CK. Very nice job. Thank you.
Thank you. For everyone at home, get out there and live your wildest dreams. And until next time.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.